Dan Perry is the former chairman of the Foreign Press Association of Israel. He joins me now from Tel Aviv. Good to have you with us. Do you think Netanyahu wants a deal with Hamas at this point?
I don't think Netanyahu wants the deal that Hamas is offering, and Hamas hasn't really changed the offer for about 14 months, which is for Israel to get back the hostages in exchange for an end to the war and a pullout from Gaza. And Netanyahu says that he can't leave Hamas in power, and that would effectively be the result of that deal, which is why Netanyahu appears to prefer partial deals where there's a pause in the war and they get back some of the hostages. The plot thickens when you start to consider that the reason why Hamas would be in power if Israel were to pull out is because Israel itself has been blocking the creation of an alternative and has been refusing the obvious path forward of restoring the Palestinian Authority in one form or another to power in Gaza. It's a very messy situation, and the Israeli people are a little bit confused by all this gaslighting, because at the end of the day, the vast majority in Israel want to be done with this thing.
So how do you interpret Netanyahu's comments when he says that the talks are making headway?
I think Netanyahu is trying to drive things in the direction of a partial deal, where they get back some of the hostages in exchange for a pause in the war. Hamas will, I'm sure, as things are now, not give up all of the hostages in exchange for anything other than an end to the war, not without monumental pressure from the outside world and from the Arab world and from the street. And I think such pressure could emerge if Israel were offering a plausible, a feasible way forward that does not include Hamas. And by the way, I agree with Netanyahu that it would be unwise to allow Hamas to remain in power in Gaza. They are essentially a criminal terrorist group whose primary victims are the Palestinians.
There have been plenty of proposals from the US side, though, which would not leave Hamas in power. We heard on September the 26th, the US releasing a proposal for, quote, an immediate 21-day ceasefire. Hours later, Benjamin Netanyahu saying his country will strike with full force and, quote, not stop. On May the 31st, the US president outlined a ceasefire proposal that would, quote, begin immediately. Less than 24 hours later, June the 1st, the Israeli prime minister said there wouldn't be a ceasefire before Israel achieves its goals. When you add up all of these facts, does it look like actually Netanyahu sees it in his political interest for his political survival to just keep this war going?
Well researched. And I could do you one better. Israel itself proposed a staged deal whereby at the end of the stages, indeed, Israel would pull out and get all the hostages. That was proposed by Israel and announced publicly by Joe Biden on May 31st, when it looked like Hamas would accept that, because, as I say, that really does align with Hamas's goal of remaining in power, ending the war in exchange for the hostages.
But you're not suggesting the US wants to leave Hamas in power, right? The US would be prepared to leave Hamas in power? That's a US administration position? That's how you read it?
My reading is yes. They don't want it. The Palestinians shouldn't want it. Friends of the Palestinians shouldn't want it. But given the situation that there is no alternative, partly because of Israel's own blocking of that alternative, then I think they'd be prepared. And I think people who say, let's be done with it, let's give Hamas their victory narrative and have them pretend they somehow are victorious, assume that it is in the DNA of vile jihadi terrorists that they will do another provocation somewhere down the line, and then you fight them without one hand tied behind your back, and then you truly eradicate. It's very messy. And you mentioned Netanyahu's political survival. Yeah, he stands accused by many people in Israel of essentially wanting to prolong something that can be presented as a war, even if all it really is an Iraq-style insurgency, because the edifice that he has built on the political side is that we can't do an accounting for the debacle of October 7th until the war is over. So that obviously incentivizes a forever war. I don't like.
What about, if I may jump in, what about the occupation? Is that not what is really incentivizing the war? Something that the International Court of Justice has ruled, or the ICC has ruled, that it's illegal in its ruling of July 19th.
I agree that's an issue, but it's a separate issue. Israelis, by and large, don't want to occupy Gaza, and they don't buy the narrative that says that their blockade of Gaza and Egypt's blockade of Gaza, constantly while Hamas was in power, to prevent an invasion and a mass.
Regardless though of what the narrative that they might believe, that's the reality though, right? There is an occupation that is incentivizing the trouble. No, you don't see that either?
I have
no occupation?
many times I'm capable of comprehending if the territory is occupied. And Gaza under Hamas from 2007, from 2005 when Israel pulled down, up until 2013.
The UN Secretary General has gone on the record several times referring to it as occupied territory, including the ICC in its ruling, even after the Israeli ground troop withdrawal.
The UN Secretary General is not a monopoly on the truth and on understanding of the complex situation.
He doesn't know the reality?
No, I don't think it does. Gaza was not occupied. The West Bank is occupied.
All right.
They are separate things.
Dan Perry is the former chairman of the Foreign Press Association of Israel. He joins me now from Tel Aviv. Good to have you back, Dan. Let's have another crack at this. So we're seeing an intensified series of attacks on hospitals. Why is Israel attacking hospitals, particularly in northern Gaza?
I'm sure they would deny attacking hospitals and claim that there are Hamas targets using and abusing the vicinity of the hospital. I really don't have the details of this latest attack and can't justify or condemn it. But it is obviously a terrible misfortune when civilians and people in hospitals and doctors end up caught up in this nightmare. And yet another reason for all sides, I think, to work towards ending the war and pressuring and applying whatever pressure needs to be applied on perhaps both sides to find a way to end it.
A number of organizations like Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, in their report of December the 2024, offered a different, perhaps, explanation for the attacks on hospitals rather than fighters being located there. It talked about Israel attacking healthcare facilities to unravel the fabric of society in Gaza, and that, quote, the signs of ethnic cleansing are undeniable. We had a similar statement by Oxfam November 27th saying Israel is in the late stages of ethnic cleansing in North Gaza. When we hear from aid organizations that are there, these are not Palestinian or Israeli, they do have at least some respect, if not a lot of respect, in the international community. Is it justified to be worried about ethnic cleansing going on?
Look, Sammy, ascribing intention of this or any other sort to the government is just not something I can do. We both know why Israel says it does what it does, and it's never going to admit to an effort to make life unlivable in northern Gaza. And frankly, it's speculation, and my own assessment or speculation would be that no, that is not the purpose. At least everyone I speak to, both in the Israeli public and in the government, or at least official circles, are pretty consistent in what their goals are, and their goals are really quite clear: for Hamas to be eradicated as a governing force in Gaza, and for the hostages to be returned. And everything else is probably a case of conspiracy theorizing and overthinking. Now, in pursuit of these two goals, which I think are both legitimate, are they committing actions that they shouldn't be? Quite possibly. The argument for ethnic cleansing would involve the idea that Israel's subliminal goal would be to render northern Gaza uninhabitable so that the Palestinians can't return there. I don't have evidence that is their goal, but I do know that some far-right people in the government would certainly like for Gaza to pay a territorial price as a consequence of having basically waged war on Israel in the most barbaric fashion possible on October 7th. There is a not ridiculous idea that Israel needs a buffer zone inside Gaza to protect from any further invasion. But of course, Gaza is so small that it seems impractical. I hope that cooler heads will prevail, and what will emerge from what is undoubtedly a nightmare is for Gaza to be led by a force that Israel doesn't fear, and therefore such thoughts disappear, because obviously, as I say, that is not a good way forward and almost guarantees more conflict.
Dan Perry, appreciate your patience. Thanks so much for coming back.